Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. The title of our webinar today is Improving Compliance in the Construction Industry Through Digitization. Please note that everyone's microphones will be muted during this webinar. Should you have any questions during the session, please put them in the Q&A. We will attempt to answer all your questions during the session. If we do run out of time, we will respond via email after the webinar. My name is Stephen Jeffrey and I'll be your host for this session. I have with me here today Daniel Weber and Sean Wilkins. Daniel is a seasoned safety, health and environmental risk and compliance specialist and an admitted attorney with over 15 years of experience in legal compliance, environmental law and occupational health and safety. Based in Ballito, South Africa, Dan has built a career at the intersection of law and operational risk, advising a wide range of clients from global manufacturing to government departments on regulatory compliance, EHS audits, ISO standards, and ESG strategies. Dan holds an LLB and bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Cape Town and is a certified ergonomics risk assessor and ISO auditor. He currently manages the risk and compliance division at Saryx Engineering. Dan has conducted over 350 compliance audits across industries such as energy, mining, automotive, and FMCG. He has been the trusted advisor to a number of leading firms like NCS, Astron Energy, John Thompson, FL Smith, and Rawbooks Group, to mention just a few. Welcome, Dan. Sean is the founder and owner of Dynamic Leap Safety Consulting and brings over 15 years of international experience in health and safety across a wide range of industries. Throughout his career, he has provided expert advice and strategic support to companies aiming to achieve their health and safety objectives and goals. Sean's experience includes developing safety management systems, incident investigations, risk management systems, accredited workplace training and leadership development in terms of health, safety, and environmental aspects. Sean is deeply committed to a proactive safety culture and firmly believes that zero harm is not just a vision, but an achievable reality. Welcome, Sean. We're going to cut straight into a conversation with Dan right now, where we're focusing on the main risks faced in the construction industry today.
When you're looking at this type of thing is, as you know, when it comes to hazards are things that have the potential to cause harm, meaning they are there, but something must happen for that hazard to materialize. And when you're looking at hazard and hazard identification risk assessment, that is what you look at. You look at your hazard that's there, and then you look at your risks. So that's your probability and your severity. So if you think of these risks, you need to also think of what are these contributing factors? What contributes to making these risks a reality? Because when addressing these, you can alleviate the risks. It's like kind of trying to find the root cause to prevent an incident from happening again. So just thinking about that when I look at this and I look at some of the contributing factors, and obviously looking at our theme today, which is about digitization, I think some of the contributing factors that elevate risks becoming a reality would, one of them would be inadequate training or competency. I think we see this quite a lot, and you'll see when I speak to some of the cases that we do later that it comes in through both of them. And this can be from inadequate training, such as receiving training from non-accredited service providers, to a complete lack of training, and also the use of incompetent persons, or I don't like to say incompetent, but it could be incompetent as well as unqualified persons. It's quite commonplace in not only on construction sites, but we see it quite common in various industries. And you'll see it again, like I said, in some of the cases we're looking at a bit later. So, for example, someone may be employed as a laborer, and they're instructed, but they're not instructed to work on scaffolding or to carry out other activities that they actually don't have the competency to do. And that actually ties into some of the other things that I'll speak about, because most of these things are interrelated. When we look later at some of the consequences, you see how things are interrelated as well. Poor document management and record keeping is another one. I think this speaks directly to what we're discussing today, in that trying to manually manage documentation is fraught with various dangers. I mean, some of these sort of risks that you find in manual-based systems is you can lose documents. Documents can get lost. Documents can get destroyed. Safety files, the whole file can go missing. So then you lose your records. That also results in poor audit trails. It is very difficult. I think if you've been on a site where there are multiple contractors and multiple safety files, you can quite easily see how things can go missing. There's also a huge administrative burden. It just because someone is not doing well when it comes to manual tracking, it doesn't mean that they're poor at their job all the time. It's just that the administrative burden is so big in trying to keep the manual documents up to date that it's difficult. It's very difficult to track things like expiry dates. You can imagine having to track, say, 100 medicals, and you need to make sure that not a single one expires. So it is difficult on the manual side of things. Updating documents manually also takes time. There's no real time updating. And then version control is difficult. I think we see that quite often where someone will print something out and that then becomes an uncontrolled document, which ends up passing through a couple of hands, and that has been, say, replaced by version 2 and 3, but it's still floating around in a company. There's also another contributing factor would be a lack of understanding. People not knowing what is required to do certain tasks is a surefire way of an incident happening or an accident happening. I'm not going to pretend to know how to fly a plane, but you'll see sometimes people are sent out to do that. No, I'm not going to say fly a plane, but to do jobs that they don't have an understanding of what to do. So, for example, if you don't know what the dangers of confined spaces or working at heights, it increases the risk massively. I think confined spaces is quite a big one. I remember when I first started and I was teaching myself about all this stuff in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and I came across confined spaces. First thing that went into my head was it must be a small space. And when you realize that a confined space is somewhere where there is a deficient atmosphere, then you realize that a confined space can be a large area. It doesn't have to be a small space. So I think, I'm using that as an example because I remember seeing a safety video where guys were working on a construction site in a pit. It was huge. And there was a release of gas, and 3 of them got overcome. Now, you would never think that is a confined space unless you've been informed of the hazards that are attached to, in that particular area of what's there. So I think a lack of understanding is a big issue. There's also that lack of or the ignorance of legal requirements. We do have a lot of legal requirements in South Africa. We have some of the best laws, I think, in the world when it comes to health and safety. Even our environmental laws are brilliant. The what do you call it? The policing of that is not always the best, but we really do have that. It kept the lights on for quite a few years doing all my compliance audits, because that kind of showed people where they were lacking in terms of their understanding of the legal requirements. I think a big one that I've picked up in my career is a lack of supervision and leadership commitment, which results in a poor safety culture. And I say that because when I first started specializing in health and safety compliance, it was quite evident that a lot of the companies that I went to, they followed the sort of reactive approach to health and safety as opposed to the proactive approach. So they react to adverse events instead of proactively planning to prevent them from happening in the first place. And I remember going to a site once where the guys had pretty much nothing in place. And when I asked him what was going on, he just said, well, we haven't had a fatality in 20 years. And that is the complete wrong attitude to have. And then on the other hand, I audited once with a guy from Belgium, and he was on the other side of the spectrum. He was panicking being on a site where there was probably 2 machines and 1 forklift, and he thought it was the most dangerous site on earth. But that company was an international company that had already proactively planned. They were proactive when it came to safety. And you could see the difference between those two companies. So I think that for me shows a lack of leadership commitment to safety, and it's definitely changing. It's changing. I've seen it over the years change, where even small companies now are wanting to be proactive, but the reactive approach is still quite widely used or seen, around the country. The lack of supervision is also quite common in construction. This is often due to cost constraints. It's not an excuse, but cost saving. If you have to have 5 safety officers, and you also working on multiple sites, you kind of put them onto different sites, and that's more on the reactive side of things. So a lack of supervision is often seen there as well. And for me, it's a result of a lack of leadership commitment. I'm going to give a great example. I even use it in audits and everything. I've always used this example of how safety culture and leadership commitment makes a massive difference. Because your safety culture can only come from the top down. You cannot expect the people at the bottom to create your culture. And when I said I'd use this example, I used to do a lot of audits for a large food manufacturer. And with that, we'd audit their different facilities over there was each year we'd audit different sites. And obviously with any group of companies, you're going to get some bad apples and some good apples as well. So I'll just refer to the one as Site A. The manager, he would attend opening meetings when we'd go and audit. He'd then attend the site inspection with the audit team. He'd pop in every now and again while we're doing the document review. And he offered his full support whenever we were there. What impressed me was how he knew the name of every employee in his factory. And this was a big factory. He would greet each one of them when we walked around. And if he saw anything that was unsafe, he would sort it out there and then. And I've always said this to everyone, because it was a food factory, that you could literally eat off the floor of that factory. It was so good. Their audit report was good. And as auditors, if anyone on here is an auditor, you know that you need to find findings, especially even if someone's having a good audit. You got to show that you're doing your job. And then when you look at Site B, I remember a particular audit. The manager attended the pre-audit meeting, but then informed me that I must be quick because he is busy. I then never saw him again until the closing meeting. The lack of compliance on that site was dire. And you could see even the demeanor of the employees. It was malaise, it was apathy. A lot of them didn't know what was going on. And yeah, needless to say, that audit report was quite lengthy and not in a good way. And interestingly, a few years later, despite being warned in multiple audits that we did about a particular pollution causing action, that site got hit with a big remediation order and had to pay millions in fines in terms of damage to the environment. And that just highlights the effect of poor management and a lack of leadership commitment. In South Africa, we have 11 official languages, so that can create language and literacy barriers as well. And this can go from when you are information sharing or training, doing a toolbox talk, or even communication on site between colleagues. Things can very easily get lost in translation. I think it is a major issue on any site, but on construction sites especially so, where you have a sort of melting pot of nationalities on there quite often. There's also the use of unskilled labor, or other times what we call the Bakkie Brigade. These are generally small companies, small construction companies that will kind of do anything. And they are generally non-compliant with legislative requirements because they are a small little company. They're just trying to get by a lot of the time. And they generally fly under the radar as well. So that is also a concern. And then there's 2 more that I'll just chat about quickly. And the one is cost cutting. Obviously, with the rising cost of materials and inflation, and I think Trump not trying to help anyone in the world other than himself, things are becoming expensive, and companies will look for ways to cut costs. I think that's part of the reactive approach to safety as well. I'm going to cut costs because we haven't had a fatality in 20 years, so let's let that one slide. But cost cutting, there should be no cost attached to safety that's too much. Because one fatality is too many, and that if it's a result of cost cutting, it's really, it's not worth it. And that ties in with the use of unskilled labor. due to our massive unemployment rate in this country, people are willing to work for next to nothing. And a lot of companies take advantage of this. They'll get guys because they know they can pay them, I don't know, 200 Rand a day or whatever it is, and they can get them to do work. And generally, they're going to be unskilled. And sadly, because labor is cheap, life is cheap, which is a terrible thing to say, but I think it's quite evident in some of the accidents that we see. And then the last thing that I'm not really going to speak to today because it's not part of what we're looking at is we all know about the construction mafia, which is a major, major, major issue in South Africa. But as I said, I'm not going to delve into that one today. So yeah, I think Steve, those are some of the key risks and contributing factors from my side that I think the construction industry face. But not only them, industry in general faces a lot of these issues. Thanks.
Yeah, Dan, thanks very much. Very insightful view to that. I read on LinkedIn the other day, one of the safety officers was saying they were called to an incident and somebody had got hurt. And the comment was, where was safety? Implying that the safety officers should have been there to prevent it instead of it actually being a holistic view to it. You know, when we all think about zero harm, we all have to think about zero harm. So they're really interesting. I know, Sean, from your perspective, you're very keen on the zero harm not being just a pipe dream, but something that we can really drive towards. So I want to direct my next two questions to you. It's actually a two-part question. The first part really is, in your experience, which compliance areas are most overlooked in the construction industry? As the first part. And the second part is, what do you think are the most common causes of compliance failures? Is it lack of training? Is it skills? Is it governance? Is it ignorance? Is it negligence? Was it lack of supervision? Or what are the other issues that may arise in this in this industry? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Yeah, in my experience, we are overlooking a lot of compliance on construction areas. But the things that's standing out for me is obviously risk management, supervisory oversight, and then Dan mentioned it as well, our competency. So while companies appoint supervisors to meet the regulatory requirements, there's also insufficient understanding of the act and regulations. So let me give you an example. A lot of companies think that a guy might be a very good worker and then he'll also be automatically be a good supervisor. But it's not so easy. So some people just struggle to supervise people, and that's also a big problem that we sit with. This leads to a dangerous gap between compliance and practical applications on site. Supervisors generally responsible for enforcing health and safety, hazards, identification, stopping unsafe work, yet they are not adequately trained to enforce this. So I'm seeing the safety files is compliant, but people think that the safety file, if that is done at the right level, you are fine. But for me, the big gap is physically on site. How are we managing health and safety? So it comes down to a lack of competency in the first thing, and then also accountability. The guys don't really understand what that entails to be a supervisor and a legal appointee. With myself having been through a number of fatal inquiries, it just gets really out of control, and the guys really after those sessions only understand but what is the consequences of these type of things. Dan mentioned in terms of employee competencies, and we also struggle, especially when it comes down to employment of local laborers. These guys, a lot of them have not been schooled, and their training competency is quite a big issue. If you look at the definition of competency in the Act, it's clear you should have the knowledge, skills, training, and experience. So a lot of times, per example, I see the guys just bringing these guys in, getting a CV, just check here and there if the guy can do the work, let him sign a one-page induction form, and then let him do a medical and put him into work. So that's why we're already starting on the back foot with all of this. So this is a big issue. I mean, we definitely need to look at compliance assessment beforehand, actually managing and testing a guy before it starts working. The mines do it so much better, I believe, because they have to do planned task observations as a legal requirement. So this is where you basically look at the guy's competency if he's actually following the SOP. Upskilling programs. Do we really take that group of people before we start a project and we take them through 2-3 weeks of orientation, training, making them really conversant of their risk and exposures? And I understand there's lots of constraints and issues around that, cost-wise, and sometimes the guys get the job and they need to start. But we really need to make sure that we are actually getting the guys at the right level before we start. Because if we're already on a back foot, the risk is very high for us. The guys don't understand the work and exposures, and then they get hurt or there's a loss of life. So that's a big gap that I see currently in the industry out there. And obviously for me, the training mentorship is very, very, very important in this regard. So that we can definitely improve on. Yeah, in a nutshell, that is what I see currently as a big issue out there.
Yeah, Sean, thanks very much. I feel your passion around that, and I guess you know, when you've had to attend to a fatality investigation is where you kind of really learn about the nuts and bolts of what goes wrong, and you know, just we want to be able to get to a point where we don't have to attend fatalities anymore because we are actually doing things in a more compliant way. So Dan, it's clear construction industry is a high risk industry, right? And so what are the consequences really of non-compliance?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think there are various consequences, and they, like I said earlier, everything kind of interlaps, or what's the word, the intertwined in terms of consequences as well. And generally these include legal, financial, and reputational damage. I kind of break them up into those three, but they all tie into each other. Interestingly, I know we were on a webinar a couple of months ago, I think this was mentioned, but I had a look, and in 2023, FEM, the Federated Employees Mutual Assurance Company, which is one of the insurers for employees, they reported that the average direct cost of a workplace incident in South Africa was approximately 73,000 Rand per incident. And obviously that's across the board. They did a long study over that, but it varies as well in terms of the nature of the incident. So for example, MVAs or motor vehicle accidents average at about 144,000 Rand. Slips, trips, and falls was 47,000 Rand, and injuries involving contact with the electrical current was as high as 185,000 Rand. So when you look at those costs, even though not everything costs that, but on average, when you look at that, that shows that firstly, there's a lot of accidents, a lot of incidents, and secondly, that the cost of this is high. And I know that I've seen an insurer use this before to say people will moan about the cost of safety, but they don't ever look at what the cost of consequence of safety lacking on incident is. And that's the financial cost. That's a direct cost. There's obviously bigger costs at play when it comes to injuries and accidents, especially fatalities. And remember, this is only one of the insurance companies, FEM. There are others like RMA, and I think RCS as well is another one. But it gives a clear indication that there's a massive financial burden on non-compliance. Injuries and fatalities can also result in criminal prosecution and jail time, and both obviously have a massive risk on a company's reputational risk. But more importantly, especially on fatalities, it's the damage that is done to families can be generations to come. That is the biggest thing. That is the biggest thing that we need to, when you talk about zero harm, preventing injuries and fatalities, especially serious injuries, or obviously fatalities firstly, but serious injuries is a must. But I just used the example when it comes to reputational risk. I was, when I'm looking later we're looking at the George building collapse, I was doing my research and try to look into that principal contractor, and their business is gone. I even stumbled upon a Facebook page for one of their developments in Mossel Bay, and the page is just strewn with negative comments following that tragedy. Reputational risk was the least of anyone's concern, I think, when it comes to that incident, but it does show the effects that something can have on a company. There's also the long-term health issues for workers as well. Non-compliances can result in long-term issues such as silicosis, ergonomic injuries, like carpal tunnel syndrome, or even hearing loss as well. I think we all know, if you all are familiar with asbestosis and all the cases that came with that from years ago, and how asbestos has, it's being phased out slowly but surely. But the long-term issues can occur when there is non-compliance, and it can have a major impact on the quality of life of these employees and add a financial burden onto the company as well. Companies can also there could be a loss of license or accreditation. So on the construction side, if you could lose a CRDB, your Construction Industry Development Board grading, that means you can't tender for certain projects at a certain level, and non-compliance can lead to that. Fines and penalties, that's kind of a no-brainer. But they're not only related to injuries and fatalities. They can also be imposed for project overruns and delays. So if you get a stop work on a site because you're failing to comply, or the department comes on site and they do an audit and they find that there are major non-compliances, and they do a stop work order, that can result in major penalties on terms of your contract as a contractor, and that's for non-compliances. So like I say, the fines and penalties not only related to injuries, but can also be related to non-compliance and project overruns. Your contracts can even be terminated for non-compliance, which has a huge impact on the finances of a company. But it also has a direct impact on employees who, it may be a big project and that gets cancelled, the contract gets terminated, and then employees lose their jobs. So it doesn't only impact companies, it impacts the employees as well. Insurance premiums can also be affected. If you demonstrate repeated non-compliance, you add to those statistics that FEM had looked at, your insurance premiums can be affected. And that obviously results again in a financial burden. And then I spoke about it earlier about the reputational risk, but it's a real risk for companies these days. It's a real risk for anyone these days. I think social media has sort of changed things, because news is now accessible from anywhere. And sadly, in many instances, the story doesn't even need to be true because of the way things are going. But reputational risk is a major consequence of non-compliance. I think if you look at, I use this example on the environmental side of things, but most people, if you speak to them about Shell or BP, mainly Shell because it's closer to home, the first thing that comes to mind is, no, they don't like Shell because of the fracking. If you think of the oil spill in the Gulf or BP, many people don't like BP, and that happened many years ago. But your reputational risk, once it's gone, it takes a very long time to build it up again. But I think at the end of the day, non-compliances will eventually have an adverse result, whether it is an injury or a fatality, or if it's financial, adds a financial burden, that will result in adverse result. You cannot keep being non-compliant and expect everything to be fine. And obviously our most undesirable result is injury or the death of an employee. And that is a real risk when it comes to non-compliance. So yeah, I think in terms of consequences, those are some of the more prevalent consequences that I can think of when it comes to non-compliance.
Yeah, Dan, thanks very much. It always strikes me that people look at the financial costs immediately because it's apparent and it's upfront and it's in your face, but it's those hidden costs of losing the life of a loved one and the consequences of the knock-on effect of that's sometimes overlooked. Thank you for highlighting that for us, and of course the other stuff that you were talking about is really important to us. There have been quite a number of questions that have come through on the chat line. If I could ask you to please place those questions in the Q&A section, otherwise I'm going to lose it within the actual chat there, and we'll get around to answering the questions as we go along. So please be patient with us. We'll get to those questions and try and answer them as best as we can in a short while. So I'd like us just to change tack a little bit and turn our attention to the current draft construction regulation and its impacts. So Dan, from a legal perspective, the draft amendments construction regulation was recently published. Can you run through some of the proposed changes and what kind of impact you foresee these proposed changes would have on the construction industry?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think whenever changes happen to legislation, that generally garners industry attention and comments from people, especially to people within the industry, because it's important people to understand what these changes are and how it's going to affect their operations, and the industry as a whole. Sometimes I look at some of the changes that are proposed, and I wonder why they're proposing some of these changes, but that's why it's good that we get commentary periods. And I think looking at some of the proposed changes in the construction regs, it's quite clear that the after effect of the George building collapse can be seen in some of those proposed changes. And I think everyone must just be aware, because it's proposed changes, some of these may never see the light of day. Some may be amended. I think many people that are on here today are members of SIOSH, and I'm not sure if you would have read the comments that SIOSH sent through. They're always a very good, what's the word? Good institution to have when it comes to commenting on health and safety stuff, because they do it quite thoroughly. Whenever I'm looking at proposed changes in the law, especially when it's wholesale changes, the first thing I do as an attorney and someone who's legally trained is I go and look at definitions, because definitions have a major impact on the meaning or intention of the legislator. So the meaning of a particular section, a particular word, definitions have quite a big impact. I'm not going to go through all the definitions, but just looking, the first one that I look at is the definition of health and safety file. So currently, a health and safety file in the current regulations means a file or other record containing the information in writing required by these regulations. The proposed change means a file prepared under Section 7(1)(b). Now, I never like definitions like this, definitions that refer to something in the law. Definitions by nature should be able to define something, as in explain what it is and what is needed. I don't like it when it's referred to something, because in this instance, it doesn't actually provide enough information exactly what a safety file is. It essentially doesn't define what it is, which is the purpose of a definition. It refers the reader to a particular regulation. So if you go to that regulation, you can see that it says that the safety file must include all the documentation required under these regulations. But it's much better to have something that is more exact. And I actually liked the comment from SIOSH, who also took issue with this, and they said they should change the definition to, it's a collection of documents and records that details health and safety information of a project. And that's quite specific. So I really liked what they suggested, and hopefully that gets taken into account, and that's what the definition becomes. I think we all in our heads know what a health and safety file is, because everyone who's done one knows what it looks like and what should be in there. Well, we all think we know what should be in there. But yeah, I think that's a nice definition. I like the way that they've defined that. And then similarly, they have proposed to change the definition of a principal contractor. Currently, the definition is, it means an employer appointed by the client to perform construction work. Very simple, well thought out, I think. You're an employer, you're appointed by the client, and you're there to perform construction work. So it's nice and specific and short and sharp. The proposed new definition means the contractor appointed under Regulation 5(1)(k) to perform the specified duties. If you look at the two, this one is confusing. Again, it's referring you. It's saying you are appointed under Regulation 5(1)(k), which says the client must appoint a principal contractor in writing. So it's just referring you to something that tells you what you are. The issue I think I have here is that also you have to, when you're looking at a definition, you break it up as well. So we need to look at, now that they don't say means an employer, they're saying the contractor, which means you need to go look at the definition of contractor. So it makes you have to go and look to see what the whole definition is, which again, it's not something I really like. I think the mention of specified duties is quite vague. It's simple in the current definition where it says you're appointed to perform construction work. So if you perform construction work, you've been appointed by the client and you are appointed as a principal contractor. There we go. Where they say specified duties, it means that the duties would need to be very specific, set out very specifically by the client. Obviously, the duties within the regulations you have to comply with, but it opens it up a bit more to, if there's a legal challenge, to talk about specified duties. So the catch-all definition, what I mentioned now, which is much better, when it says construction work, you know that if you're performing that construction work as opposed to specified duties, then you are regarded as your principal contractor. There have also been major changes proposed to Regulation 3, which is for the application for a construction work permit. So one of the sort of themes in terms of the proposed changes is to get the clients and the designers, to an extent as well, to be more engaged and more involved in the process. You'd often get, on big sites, you generally have an agent that steps into the shoes of the client, but this is part and parcel of the George building collapse, where the client now needs to, with the proposed changes, take a bit more interest in what's happening, especially at the design phase. So an application for construction work permit, this is an application that is made by the client, not a contractor. And currently what the law states is that you need to apply for a construction work permit if the construction work will exceed 180 days, will involve more than 1,800 person days of construction work, or if the works contract is of value equal to or exceeding 13 million rand or CRDB grading level 6. The proposed change is quite different. It's now saying, or the proposal is that the intended construction work will exceed 365 days, so it's pretty much doubled. They've taken out the part related to person days, and that may be why they have added the 365 days. And they've also increased it to CRDB grading level 7. So that's from 13 million rand up to 40 million rand, where 6 is 6.5 million to 13 million. So that means it's applicable to higher value projects as well. And the new part that they have added is to a building that exceeds 2 stories above ground level. So that is almost a direct thing to the George building collapse, because part of the issue was the contractor that was building it didn't actually have that grading. They didn't have the competency to build. It was a 5-story building, I think. So the important part to remember here when it comes to the permit, it's not and, it's or. So it's 365 days or construction CRDB grading level 7 or exceeds 2 stories above ground level. So a lot of smaller level construction projects, which aren't going to take 365 days or are not at that level, but will exceed 2 stories above ground level, the client will now have to apply for that construction work permit. So that is another one of them. And then Regulation 4. So a notification of construction work is done by a contractor. And currently what the law requires is that you have to submit this notification. It's a fairly short document. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. If the work that you'll be doing, the construction work, will include excavation work, where you'll be working at heights where there's a risk of falling, will include the demolition of a structure, or include the use of explosives to perform construction work. So that's how it currently stands. So there are triggers. There are triggers for when you need to submit a notification of construction work. The proposed amendment is to remove those triggers completely. And so what this is doing, it means that all contractors, when you're doing construction work, you'll have to submit that notification. And this is going to, I'm not sure why they've done this. I think it's got to do, leading also from the George building collapse, where it's now making sure that they have a bigger handle on what contractors are doing, where construction is happening. However, they don't take into account the massive administrative burden this is going to put onto the DOL, because now they would be receiving a whole lot more notifications of construction work. And to be honest, they are not receiving ones that they should be receiving now anyway. I used to do safety files for a company who never knew, and they used to do construction work. And when I arrived and when I started helping them, they didn't know what a notification of construction work was. I had to kind of educate them, which is a scary thought considering the work they were doing. And I think that happens in a lot of instances. And it goes back to what we talk about a lack of knowledge. And I've got it down to say it later, to say we must always remember ignorance is not a defense in law. So that lack of knowledge is not going to protect you when it comes to a court challenge. So this is one that I feel will probably change. They need to keep some triggers there because it is just going to create a massive burden on the DOL to try and police these and to receive them all. And then just in terms of duties of the client, so like I said, they're wanting to get the clients to get more sort of involved. Currently, a client has to prepare a baseline risk assessment for intended construction work, and then they must make sure that the designer takes the SHE specification into account during the design design stage. Sorry. What they're changing this to is they have proposed to change it that the client must prepare a design risk assessment. Now, design risk assessment is not defined anywhere in the law, but a design risk assessment is not something a client would be able to do. That would be the designer generally would conduct that risk assessment. And remember, the sort of issue I have with this is competency around who can conduct that design risk assessment. Most of the designers, when you refer to designer, would be structural engineers would be involved. So they would have that knowledge and competency. So I think what it's trying to do is it's making it a duty of the client to ensure that gets done. So it's not saying the client must do it, but they need to make sure that a design risk assessment, what that means is that before a project commences, the adequate pre-construction activities have taken place, including a risk assessment of the design when you're designing certain things. The one part that is quite confusing is they indicate that the designer needs to provide a written report, but they don't specify what type of report. They don't specify what it must entail. They just say written report. And I'm quite sure that will change, because clarity would need to be obtained as to what that written report is. In terms of management and supervision of construction work, they have introduced the construction health and safety managers. But the one that I wanted to look at was currently you need to look at the risk of a project, and in consultation with the client and considering the size and the risk of the project, a contractor must appoint a health and safety officer. The proposed regulations are changing this to may appoint. So that is quite nice when it comes to smaller construction sites where there are cost implications and budgetary limits, where you can look at the nature or the risk attached to a project or the size, and determine, you then choose based on that risk profile whether you require a safety officer. It sounds good and well, saying may, but if something has to happen and the department comes in and they say, well, actually your risks are very high, you should have appointed one. So there's still liability risks, they're big liability risks. That's the change between must and may. Must means you must do it, so then you do it. So you that's a control measure in place. May is, okay, well, it's kind of up to me to do this. So it opens you up to liability. So it's a good proposed change, but it's also one that people need to be wary of when they do it. And I think it comes to sort of my one of the most exciting proposed changes is that the law now specifically says that a principal contractor must open and keep on site a physical or electronic health and safety file. Sticking to our theme of digitization and what we do, seeing that made me very happy when I saw the proposed regs come out, because I think it lends credence to what we're doing today. There is a desire to move away from manual-based systems and manual-based safety files. This is now something that the law is giving contractors or principal contractors, it's giving you the choice, because it says you may choose a physical or electronic safety file. You can't now be forced by a client to have a manual safety file. If you want to have the electronic one, it is it's a duty on the principal contractor. And that flows into the contractors as well. We've had many clients or prospective clients where they say, well, we do manual safety files because the client says that's what we have to do. Now the law is saying you can choose. So you must open always the big one here, a physical or an electronic health and safety file. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there is a desire to move away. And let's be honest, the world is progressively and actually quite rapidly moving away from paper-based things everywhere, more towards digital in all spheres of life. And why should safety be any different? Even look at money. So many places you go to now and they don't accept cash. So for me, that is a great proposed change, and I hope it sticks there. I'm sure it will. And then just lastly, in light of one of the cases that I'm going to talk about, is the regulation 16 relating to scaffolding. So currently, what the regulation requires, I still don't think it's probably good enough as it is, but they've kind of made it worse to me, in my opinion, is that a contractor must appoint a competent person in writing who must ensure that all scaffolding work operations are carried out under his or her supervision, and that all scaffold erectors, team leaders, and inspectors are competent to carry out their work. There's that word competency, which is great. And then the second part is that a contractor using access scaffolding must ensure that the scaffolding, when in use, complies with the safety standards incorporated for this purpose into these regulations under Section 44 of the Act. The proposed amendment just says a contractor using scaffolding must ensure that such scaffolding, when in use, complies with the safety standards incorporated for this purpose into these regulations under Section 44 of the Act. And so essentially what it's saying is if you're using scaffolding, you have to ensure that it's done in terms of the standards that are incorporated into the law. And that standard is SANS 10085, which would relate to scaffolding. The problem I have with this is, for one, I much prefer where the law is more prescriptive when it comes to duties. If you look at how it currently is set out, it's set out saying that you must ensure all scaffolding work are carried out under their supervision, so there's supervisory requirement. All scaffold erectors, team leaders, inspectors are competent, meaning there must be a level of training for them to carry it out. So it kind of gives you, it tells you. It also then says that you still need to comply with those standards. And you see in the Act, a lot of standards are incorporated, and once they're incorporated, it's part of the law. The problem with that, and why I'm not a big fan of it, is that in order for someone to comply, they would need to get hold of that SANS standard. And if any of you have tried to buy a SANS standard, they're incredibly expensive. And they bring out new versions. I think it's every 5 years, or I think it is. And they'll change like 5 letters and then make you pay again. And so there is a limitation there in terms of obtaining the information you need. And then you need to go through that document to find out exactly what these duties are. So I'm not a huge fan of that. I much prefer to have, how it currently is, telling you that there's that competency requirement. So, Steve, I think the proposed changes, I think some people are divided on them. I do think there are some really good proposed changes in the regulations. I think some of them do need to be taken back to the drawing board, but that happens with all proposed changes. And I do know that there's been the George building collapse has definitely had an impact on how they are approaching these changes. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts on these changes that are coming. We don't know when. I mean, we're still waiting for the new Occupational Health and Safety Act. I think it's been about 4 years now, so we won't hold our breath too long.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Unfortunately, especially when there are so many contributing factors to these laws, I'm not a legally trained person, and I tend to agree with you when definitions refer to other parts of the law, it becomes very confusing to read. And it kind of, it left two things in my mind here around that, and it's related to, do people really understand what their obligations are? So, Sean, I'm going to ask you, what is your thought in your experience? Do clients actually understand what the contractors' obligations are, what their obligations as clients are, regarding the current regulation and potentially into the new regulations?
Well, my personal experience with this is that they maybe think they do, but they do really understand what they should implement. So what I actually see out there, the paperwork looks very well. There's heaps of regulations and acts and everything is there, but the physical implementation side is the big issue for me. So I think they know, but somewhere down the line they start not following it, and I think it's not intentionally, but it's obviously with all the pressure and stuff that is happening. So there's a big disconnection between the paperwork and what the law requires in terms of what is happening on site. And that's where I think also digital programs is definitely the future, because nobody can keep up to date with all the paperwork at all times, and you can't appoint people that just does the paperwork the whole time. So electronic management system digitalization does that on an automated level, which it actually helps you. So with all the legislative requirements that you're changing, like Dan has mentioned, I think to be up to date and just keep afloat and comply better, digital systems will definitely support us going forward.
Yeah, Sean, thanks very much. I just while you were talking there was there's some comments that have come through related to keeping this up, and I'm not going to answer those questions or pose those questions at the moment. We'll come back to them, and we'll try and do them quite holistically. There was one question that was posted in the chat that I just wanted to see if we could maybe answer that, because otherwise we're going to go on and we're not going to get back to that. Renche asked a question to you, Dan, specifically around, could you repeat the first definition? Now, I know you gave us a lot of definitions, so I'm not sure if you could just refer back to that quickly for us. I'm scanning back in his notes there.
No, sorry. I had the comments open, so I was trying to look. I will have a look at that definition. I think the first definition was the health and safety file. If I am correct, I will tell you now.
Rensha says it was just before CR 5.1K. I'm not sure what that means.
Is this the one for principal contractor?
Rensha, I'm not sure if that was the. Just give her a second. She's typing there.
Okay, cool. Yes, okay, I see. So principal contractor. So yeah, the current definition means an employer appointed by the client to perform construction work. And like I was saying, for me, it's a good definition because it's short and sharp and sweet, and it sets it out quite well. And like I said, when looking at definitions, you break it up. So firstly, they need to be an employer. Then we normally go to that in that definition. Appointed by the client to perform construction work. 5.1K is the regulation that requires the client, puts a duty on the client to appoint the principal contractor. So that does it by inference. By saying you're appointed by the client, it's pretty much saying you're complying with 5.1K. And the important part why I like that definition is it says you're there to perform construction work. So it's specific. The new proposed definition, where it says a principal contractor, means the contractor appointed under Regulation 5.1K to perform the specified duties. Now, I think the reason they've also said the contractor appointed under Regulation 5.1K is that, remember, if you look at the regulations, there's principal contractor and then you have contractors. So in many construction sites, you'll have multiple principal contractors and then they subcontract people and they can subcontract people. So it's separated between principal contractor and contractor. So I think why they've done that there is they're saying the principal contractor is that specific contractor that was appointed under that regulation. as opposed to a different contractor. It makes it a bit confusing for me. But I think my biggest issue with this definition is the specified duties, because specified duties is not defined. If you look at specified duties, in my brain, it's telling me those are duties that have been specified by the client. Okay, so it kind of gets this disconnect between the law, the requirements and the regulations that a principal contractor must comply with, and the duties that are specified. Which is the one that you comply with? Whenever we look at these things, the law will trump something. It will trump those duties. But it just creates, I think in law, what I've always thought of and looked at, I never practiced as an attorney. I got out as soon as I was admitted. I didn't want to go to court. I spent way too much time in court during my articles. But what I did pick up when I used to go to court was attorneys or advocates would hammer onto definitions. Because they could, if something was, and that's why for me a definition must be almost watertight. Whenever they open things up to interpretation, that's when trouble can happen. And that's where I think that specified duties is a bit of an issue. I'm not sure if there was something specific you wanted to get from that.
So Renchi actually came back to say it wasn't specifically around that one. She was actually relating to
the safety file.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so currently it's a file or other record containing the information in writing required by these regulations. The proposed change means a file prepared under Regulation 7.1b. So why I don't like definitions that refer to other parts. I prefer them to be, like I said, quite prescriptive in terms of telling you what it is. And that's why I really liked the suggestion of SIOSH, where they said a safety file should read, it's a collection of documents and records that details health and safety information of a project. And that's exactly what it is. A safety file is that. It is a collection of documents and records, and a safety file has all the documentation you require relating to health and safety of a project. So I like what they have proposed. That isn't, we don't know if that will be at the end of the day, if that's going to be the definition that they accept. And I just wanted to quickly look at the exact wording. I've got it here of Regulation 7. Where is it? 7.1b. Because, like I said, the definition says a file prepared under Regulation 7.1b, which what 7.1b states, it's one of the duties of a principal contractor is to open and keep on site a health and safety file, which must include all documentation required in terms of the Act and these regulations, which must be made available on request to an inspector, the client's agent, or a contractor. So it's referring you to something that's quite long-winded, where the current definition, or for me better, the suggested definition by SIOSH kind of encompasses in itself. So it doesn't need you to refer to anything. So I'm not sure if that's what you, okay, cool.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Confirmation that answers the question. It made me scratch my head a little bit around that definition, referring to another thing, but that's just me because I'm not legally competent, and I guess the reason that a lot of people are on this call is because we do get caught up on these things, and so maybe we can just change tack a little bit here, and Sean was referring a little bit to digital systems and so on. So Dan, really, with all these risks that are facing the industry and the impending changes in the construction regulation, how do you believe that digitization can actually help us to reduce risk and assist in improving on compliance?
Thanks, Steve. So I think there's so many ways. I'm a huge fan. So there's so many ways that digitization can improve on risk and can assist in improving compliance. Not only improve in risk, but assist in compliance and reduce the level of non-compliance as well. I think a lot of the things we've spoken about speak directly to how digitization can assist. So I'm just going to speak about a few of the ways that I think it can help and give a few examples as well. But it can improve your legal and regulatory compliance. I think we know that. It digitizes everything, automates things. So, I think documents cannot get lost. They cannot get destroyed. It increases your, it improves in terms of audit traceability and audit trails, so that you can go back and see, if a document has been replaced by another one, that document's still there. You can still go back and look at that document. It doesn't get lost and it doesn't get destroyed. Having records centralized and secure as well, and then also audit ready. You don't need to go run around and look for something. I always, whenever I do an audit, I send a list through before to say, hey guys, these are some of the documents I may ask for, just so that you're not running around like a chicken without a head on the day of the audit. And then people come into wherever we're doing the audit, and there's like 40 files there that have this record there, and they've got this record there, and it's difficult. Now I look at that, and when I'm auditing that, I'm like, oh, this is a mission. But for them, they have to keep those things up to date. Now, when you look at a digitization, everything is in one place. You sit at your laptop and you can go through all those documents. You can get an auditor to do it from wherever they want. They could be sitting on the beach and they could do your documentary part of your audit, not your site inspection. But they can do that from anywhere. So I think that is a major thing. That also reduces that administrative burden, and it makes things a lot more seamless and a lot easier to work with as well. Your documents can also be updated in real time. It includes legislation as well. So, and I'll just quickly speak about the legislation side of things, but the law changes all the time. The environmental law generally changes more than health and safety, but it's changing all the time. And there are so many things that everyone needs to know about. Now, if you have a manual system where you are tracking your law, you have your legislation in a file, you're never going to keep that up to date. I've seen some legal registers that are 500-page documents that are not workable. You can't do that. On the digital system, you've got it there. It's an automatic update. The law is always up to date for you. But not only that, it's inspections and checklists. You can do a checklist, and that's updated in real time and sent to someone. It's sent to your manager immediately with your signature. They then know that checklist is being done. And so that, in terms of updating in real time, it's huge. It saves a lot of time as well, but it makes it more efficient. And like I said as well, with version control and audit trails, version control is also an important one. If it's on that system, you should be looking at the most up-to-date version. There aren't 5 versions floating around on your system, whereas there could be 5 versions floating around on your site if they are paper-based. I think one of the big changes or big benefits is line of sight. It is incredibly hard to have proper line of sight on I think of a large construction site. If you are a principal contractor or an agent or whatever it is, and you have 100 contractors that are on your site, and you now need to try and track their compliance. Are they compliant? Are they doing their monthly audits? Has their COIDA documents expired? You don't know, because you would have to go and look at all those files. This solves that problem by having all your documents in place. Dashboards can tell you can actually track the compliance of your contractors. What is their compliance level? By looking at your dashboards, by getting reports in terms of the compliance level of the contractors. And I use this example as well. I remember once submitting a safety file for a client, and I said to the safety officer who was busy with the documents, to advise me if everything was in order, because I want my safety file to be front and center. And she said to me she had to go through plus minus 100 safety files, so she would let me know if she gets to it. She may not have ever got to that, but by the time the deadline hit for their shutdown and all the contractors had to be on site, it didn't matter. They had to be on site. So I think that line of sight is a very important aspect. It allows you to manage the compliance level and track the compliance level of your contractors a lot more carefully, and all from one place as well. And then it also ensures that people can't hide from their responsibilities. So it ties in with the leadership commitment and building that safety culture. you can't hide from your responsibilities. If you are assigned to do a particular task or assigned to do a particular checklist and you don't do it, your manager can get alerted to say, hey, this hasn't been done. Or you also get alerted. You get alerted and the manager gets alerted to say that this needs to be done. It's now overdue. Whereas in a manual system, it's very hard to track, especially on a big site, because you don't have the time to go and check that these guys are doing everything. You assume, or you just have to trust they are. Whereas now it forces them to do it, which is great. We've been speaking a lot about competency and training. So digitization improves that massively as well. You can set your competencies for a particular project from the outset of the project. And you can say, okay, for a scaffold erector, this is what we require as the client or even as the principal contractor. The contractors have to supply that proof of competency before they can come onto site. And this can also be further strengthened with integration of products. So for example, if you integrate with access control systems, contractors can't get on site if their safety file hasn't been approved. So they'll make sure that their safety file gets approved so they can come onto site. What that does from a client's perspective is that ensures that only competent contractors are on site. It makes you sleep better at night. Those that aren't competent, they can't get onto site until they've sorted themselves out. So it improves the competency on the contractors, or ensuring they have those competencies, because as a client, you would set that. That is your competency. So it improves the validation of that competency. And that ensures that only competent persons then do the jobs that they are meant to do. And it also applies to not only competency, but to legitimacy. So, for example, if your contractors have to upload ID documents, this can ensure that there's no underage employees or undocumented nationals, foreign nationals as well, which happens a lot in South Africa, across all industries. I think one of the biggest things that I think I mentioned it earlier, and something that we all know is a pain, is expiry dates of documents, especially of training and medicals and COIDA and all that type of thing. Trying to track on a big site, or if you've got hundreds of employees, trying to track that is a mammoth task. With digitization, that is then done automatically. That does it for you. You put a start date, you put an end date. That'll tell you when that thing is going to expire. That'll alert you. And if it's contractors, if you're the client, it alerts your contractors, so they know. And I think I saw one of the comments there about safety files just being, once it's done, it gets put to the side on site. And that is so true. It's such a true statement, because that's what happens. I'll go audit a client and say, can I see some of your safety files? And they've just got blank inspections, and they've got their COIDA documents out of date, or, but no one's checking it. So it's fine. It was compliant when they got there, but then no one kept their compliance up to date. Digitization changes that, because it will alert them to say, hey, your COIDA document's going to expire, but it alerts the client as well. And then they say, hey, if you don't get that sorted, you're getting kicked off site. So that is one of, a big one as well. I think also in terms of accessibility, it enhances safety performance. The use of mobile tools. You can now take your phone and go and do an inspection of whatever it is. It could be equipment, take pictures, and that is automatically then uploaded real time again. It's not going and writing an inspection, doing a SHE inspection, then having to go put it into a report, upload it if you have to onto SharePoint, or just file it somewhere. So now with the use of mobile tools, it helps a lot as well. You can also load, SOPs and safe work instructions, where an operator may want to see, what are the steps for me to operate this machine? They can get it on their phone. You don't need to stick it up onto the equipment, or have it lying in a file somewhere. And I think I've spoken quite a bit about it, but onboarding of contractors makes a huge difference. Contractor, you can set as a client, you could set what the requirements are for a contractor. They can then start getting all their documents ready way before the time that they have to be on site. And they get approved before they come on site. that saves you from having to receive 100 files at once, like a week before, 50 files the week before, like that poor safety officer that I dealt with that time, who I could just hear. She was frazzled. She was like, I have 100 safety files to get through. And, and the thing with that as well is she'd asked me for quite a while for the file, and I'd got it to her well in time. And she said to me that there's some people that are bringing their file tomorrow. And I think the shutdown was like 3 days later. So that's a big one as well in terms of its reduction in project delays as well. And so I think, there's so many other ways that digitization can help. I could speak about it for a long time, but I think, just to end it off on that side is that, we need to use the best available tools to improve compliance. And for me, you need to use the best tool to address one of the most critical crime requirements under the Section 8 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Section 8.1, which we call a catch-all section, which says every employer shall provide and maintain, as far as reasonably practicable, a working environment that is safe and without risks to the health of his employees. The use of digital systems like HSEC Online, these are key tools in trying to ultimately achieve this. And at the end of the day, we all want to achieve zero harm. And I think digitalization is a key tool in heading that way.
Yeah, Dan, thanks very much. It actually links to a comment made, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Turning to you, Sean, you've been in this industry for 15 odd years. You've done audits, and you've done help people to actually develop safety systems and so on. And so I'd like to kind of really get your feel for what do digital systems do? How do they help you? And what is your view around moving towards digital systems?
Well, Stephen, first of all, for our clients, the way we experience it is it's something daunting for them. They're scared of it initially, so they think, how are we going to figure it out? What's going to happen? But once they systematically upload this stuff and they develop their job descriptions and guidelines, so it kind of flows into each other systematically. So it becomes much easier. And after a few months, they say, okay, why have we never done this before? So I can definitely see with our clients that went over to digital systems, they're getting the benefits, but initially, obviously, they are scared. People don't know how the program works. But systematically, it's definitely helping them to do the work for them. With regards to a safety file, a manual file, you actually work for your system while a digital system is working for you, and that's where we want to go. All of us are using cell phones and computers at all times, and digitalization is exactly that. Dan mentioned that the people are using their phones also to do digital inspections, and you just have oversight of all your equipment. Your supervisor competency also is increasing because the guys must go and do inspection, upload photos, and it gets verified. So everyone is kind of moved into the direction, and that gives you a legal compliance. So definitely digital systems is the way to go, and going forward, like I say, old safety file systems, it's not going to evaporate. Especially not now, but in future, I foresee it's not going to be a requirement on site because paperwork gets lost, and it's a big effort. You have to update it the whole time. Documents get lost. So definitely, our clients is much more happier. Managers at all levels have got oversight of their compliance. And I think every manager doesn't want to be blindsided or have gray areas in his operation. And you can actually see where your gaps is to be able to address it.
Now, Sean, thanks very much. I was just reading some of the questions here and related specifically to that. So one of the questions, sorry, I've now lost it. From Ronnie. Ronnie says here, one thing that I want to know is when it comes to digital safety files, it is about what What about the safety officers who that are appointed on a project that can hardly even use a PC properly? Checklists on mobile plant and equipment. Will there still be a document that is needed to be in a hard copy? We won't be able to move away from a paper-based system completely. So, Dan, I don't know your views around that. I have a very specific view around that, and I believe that we as owner operators, as contract lead people, we should be driving towards upskilling people, and I honestly believe that digitization is the way forward, and because it is the way forward, we need to focus very heavily on competency and skills, which include to a lesser degree, literacy around PCs and computers. I don't know if you've got any specific views around that, Dan.
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, Steve, I share your thoughts on that completely. I think part of this is upskilling people. The way everything is going, the world is going digital, and it's not going to. Everyone has to grab on and go for the ride. And I think part of digitalization, is there is definitely a responsibility to ensure that people are upskilled to understand how to use a PC, and also to make it as basic, or not as basic, as intuitive as possible. Don't make a system incredibly difficult to understand and difficult to use, and provide that training. And I think we do that where contractors do have employees that are not very PC literate, that we actually offer to assist them to make sure that they understand how it works. Because any digital tool that you're going to use must be able to be used. People must want to use it. There's always going to be a bit of pushback with all these things in any change. But I think when AI started coming out, I was like pushing back against AI because it was scaring me so much. But you have to start learning about it and kind of embracing it, because it's not going to wait for you. So I think there can definitely eventually be a move away from hard copy completely, because checklists of mobile plant, for example, that can all be done on a cell phone, or you can get a rugged device that can be used to do those checklists. And the guys that are doing it on site can be taught how to use it. And as long as it's intuitive and easy to use and not super confusing, I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Ronnie, I understand, and I do recognize your sentiment around paper-based, and it may be a while before we can do away with paper completely. Actually, one of our clients is a paper manufacturer, so we won't do away with paper completely in its entirety. So, yeah, I don't know that we'll ever get to a state where we're completely paperless, but we certainly are driving in that direction, and for the reason that once a document or a system is digitized, then the real power of a digital system comes out, where you can start doing queries and online checking and having proper line of sight as to exactly what is happening in a digital environment. So there was another question which made me kind of just sit up and notice a little bit here. There was somebody was saying that they're using this other SIFT. What is this? I can't even say that name. It sticks in my throat here a little bit. Sorry. So HSEC Online is the sponsor of this thing, and the digital system that we prefer, that we recommend, that we insist that you use actually is HSEC Online. And HSEC Online, without going into real detail of this, if you would like to know more about it, please feel free to drop me an email. My email is Steven, STEVEN, at Saryx, SARYX.com. Just drop me an email. I'll arrange to do a presentation and demonstration to you on the system, how it looks, what the differences are, what the benefits are of a true interactive and useful digital system is. So, I welcome you to join me in that journey, and we'll go into the details around that. So thank you for that question, and thank you for the comment. Safisa had a question around electronic safety files can be prone to cybersecurity threats, viruses, theft, etc. Safisa, you're absolutely right, and to that end, we Saryx Engineering, who own HSEC Online, we spend an awful lot of time, money, and resources on ensuring that we are as safe as possible. You know, part of the POPIA Act is to ensure the data integrity and retention of that data. So yes, we try very, very hard. HSEC Online has been around for quite a long time, more than 12 years now. And to date, we've not had any breaches, and our Chief Technical Officer and her team review this on an ongoing basis, and we do audits of the system. We have external companies doing audits of our system. We have other people who also, external companies that try and see if there are any vulnerabilities and review that for us. So, Safisa, we're welcome again to have that detailed conversation with you at a later stage. If you would like to just drop me an email, we can schedule something for you. Sorry, question has just come in. I'll put my email and our website and everything. I'll put it into the chat in a moment. So I'll get back to that right now. Larry, you had a question with regards to driving the topic around training and training expiry. What happens to obeying competence and building your competency? That's a very good point. And so Sean does a lot of time, or spends a lot of time in training, and his company is around that. So I'm going to ask you, Sean, if you'd like to respond to that for us.
Yeah, definitely. The normal standard out there, training is usually valid for 2 years. It depends on who, and if it's a QCTO or a CETA, or what level of training do you require. But obviously, the training side of things, there is a typical programs which HSEC Online uses, where you can actually go and book your training. Training can be done online or on site. So they definitely have got the capabilities to support you with regards to competency training, and we actually provide that services for HSEC Online.
Yeah, thanks. Dan, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add to that from the legal perspective around training expiring and so on.
Yeah, so I think it is something for me that I do have issues with certain types of training, where expiry dates are put onto training certificates where there's no legal expiry date. We see it a lot where things like SHE-REP training they put an expiry date on there, which there's no legal time frame for that to be redone. What I prefer to see is recommended refresher date. So your first aid has to be done. The law specifically states it must be done every 3 years. Forklift operators as well. But things like even legal liability training, there's no legal requirement. There's no legal expiry date. So I prefer to see recommended refresher date on that, because a lot of them should be done every 2 years. A lot of the training, because there's a good reason for that. But some of the stuff I don't believe should be. It should stick to the legal requirements. But yeah, in terms of competency, I think we all need to just keep on learning, never stop learning. One thing I've always tried to tell myself is never think you know everything, because you definitely don't. And I'm still learning. I mean, 15 years later, I still read the law every now and again. I'm like, ooh, have I looked at this the wrong way? I'll say most of the time that I'm like, no, I've looked at it perfectly. But no, it's good to keep keep improving and keep educating yourself. So yeah, competency, like we were speaking about it, that training results in the competency, and you need to keep up on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So Larry did comment that he agrees with us. So I'd like to move on to another question here by Glenn. Glenn refers again to another digital system on a large-scale reforestation project in the Eastern Cape. Nice, interesting project, Glenn. currently employing around 70 SMMEs, approximately 700 employees. We train each SMME with first aid, SHEREP, full onboarding and inductions. Using online platforms has been a huge challenge. The project is a socio-economic driven as well, but the challenge is getting them logging incidents, etc., and doing inspections. Yeah, so I'll kick that off, and I guess forestation and forestry is because of remote locations and so on is sometimes difficult, A, from a connectivity point of view, and B, from a literacy perspective. So the system that we're proposing, which is HSEC Online, has the ability to have all of that information at your fingertips. Now, your SMMEs may not necessarily have access to a laptop computer, but they probably have got a phone. Okay, so HSEC Online, as an example, has a mobile application that can be downloaded from any of the app stores like Apple App Store or Google Play or Huawei App Gallery, and you know that can be loaded onto that. It's fairly lightweight, and they can immediately do their inspection reporting or incidents logging within that system if it's configured. Simply, it could be just a checklist. It could be a simple thing like just take a photograph, you know, without having to comment or anything like it. And really, a significant number of people know how to use cell phones. We're actually quite shocked at how intuitive it is. But you know, we can take care of the training. We can take care of that upskilling that I spoke about earlier. So you know, Glenn, I hope that you'll have a conversation with us about that, and we can then, you know, look at different ways of enabling your people or the people at that project to do that better. Sean, I don't know if you've also got a lot of experience in that space. Would you like to comment around that?
Yeah, especially in scenarios like that, the on-site physical skills development is the best. If you have got remote locations, the online systems is not always, the signals is not good. So for us, our approach would definitely be is go on-site, go and train them in their own environment and upskilling them. And also practical side of things of in the area is also very important. So upskilling them in their environment on a project like that is the best way to be able to develop their skills.
Thank you, Sean. Sean, maybe a follow-up question for you there. Susan asked the question, what training or competencies must a construction manager have? Do you have that offhand, or do we need to answer that later?
The law doesn't require clearly what a construction manager must have. So each client will direct and give their kind of specifications around that. And we must just go back to the definitions of competencies. It does have the knowledge, skills, training, experience to supervise people at that specific project, depending how big it is. So all those boxes must be ticked to be able to address the competency of a typical construction manager.
Thank you, Sean. So the other answer to that is, again, from a systematic approach. So if you use a solution like HSEC Online, the client can define what those requirements are by job matrix. So you can set up a job competency matrix within the system, so that if a person is onboarded as that construction manager, the system could then trigger as to what competencies or capabilities that person should have, and adhere to that, and then obviously manage against that. I trust that answers your question there, Susan. Carl asked the question, what are your thoughts of the proposed change to the definition of a competent person and no longer mentions the NQF qualification? Dan, I don't know if you have an answer for that?
I will have to quickly look at the definition again. Give me a second. I don't have it in front of me.
So maybe what we can do is
you can carry on.
We'll carry on. There's a question here from Anonymous. Sorry, Anonymous, I don't know. So I'd love to touch base I'd love you to touch base on the leadership commitment. However, I just want to find out how one can go about fulfilling their duties within their HSEC role in the absence of leadership. Wow. Absence of leadership. I think we spoke a little bit about, I don't know, Sean, you got a smile on your face. Help us here.
I guess you're referring to a physical safety person that's not getting some support with regards to the higher level of managers. So my suggestion with that, and I've got experience with that as well, you don't always have management support. So what you must go and look at what the law says about what is a safety officer's duties, and then obviously you focus on what the law requires. I always tell the people that we as safety specialists are giving the weather map, but the manager is flying the plane. So we are giving them the inputs and telling them how to get the end destination. And if they don't follow that, they're going to land the plane in the ocean. So we should just be passionate. Like I say, you will not always get the recognition that you want, but if you have passion with safety, you'll definitely get the results.
Sean, thank you very much. I must say I share your sentiment around, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So if your leadership is not committing to that, what you do need to understand, I guess, and Dan, you'll back me up on this, is that from a legal perspective, the safety officer doesn't take the responsibility. It's the appointed person takes the responsibility. So if they're appointed as the 16.2 or whatever that level is that they're appointed at, ultimately the buck stops with them, and you need to push back against that. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Dan.
Yeah, that is 100% true. That the buck ultimately stops with the 16-1, who's not actually an appointee, but by virtue of the fact of being the highest authority in a company, they are ultimately responsible. The delegation of duties can be done, but the delegation of responsibility can't be passed down in terms of liability. It's easy to say that, but it's different when it comes. It's different or difficult when it comes to a particular legal case if something has to happen, because they have to go through all the steps of who was responsible. And when you don't have that leadership buy-in, and you're having someone who is sort of at the coalface, you're the one that are doing the operational things, and you're trying to get this buy-in and it's not happening, and something happens. When you have a culture like that, they're generally going to try and push the blame down. And then it's a case of proving the lack of leadership, the lack of culture. It's a very difficult one, because it's something that you see a lot of, like I mentioned in that example. And it's difficult because it's so hard to drive anything from lower down and up. It needs to come from the top down. So I think in that sense, I don't know if we can answer that question about, I mean, you can fulfill your duties. And remember, the law allows you to refuse to do dangerous work. You're protected by law. And there's also law relating to whistleblowers as well. So you are allowed to refuse dangerous work if you feel that that particular job is dangerous. So the law does protect you in that sense.
There you go. Thanks, Dan.
And then Steve, I just wanted to speak about that question from Carl. It's quite a
thank you.
It's quite a complex question, actually, because there are two ways to look at it. Firstly, it's making it more, like I was talking earlier about definitions being more sort of concise, more precise. And it's doing that because it's saying you're competent if you have, and remember, it's in respect to that particular work, if you have the required knowledge, training, and experience. And then it says where applicable, qualifications specific to that work or task. So it's saying you have the required knowledge, training, experience, which in a way is quite open-ended, because you determine what is the required knowledge, training, experience if it isn't specifically stated. So if you are a forklift operator, it's specifically stated that you have to get that training. So that is the required knowledge, training, and experience. But in certain instances, it's not. And then we're at the second part where it says where applicable, qualifications specific to that work. So what I think what they are moving towards is where there is a qualification, it'll be specifically set out in the law to say, if you are a first aider, for example, you need to have this, this, and this. So it's specifically set out, as opposed to referring back to saying that where appropriate qualification and training are registered in terms of the NQFA, that they must be regarded as, what is it? Must be regarded as the required qualification. So it kind of makes it that a bit more confusing and open-ended. But like I said, it's quite a difficult one to answer because there's so many various ways of looking at it. Because it may be seen as bad, it may be seen as good. I prefer things that are more condensed. And the way that I see it, anything that requires you to be competent for, the requirement should be set out specifically in the law. It should tell you, like it does with, doesn't do it that well, but like it does with first aid training, or even like with the forklift operator training. There should be specifics in terms of what you need to be regarded as competent, because then the two can work together. Those are just my thoughts though on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. As you said, it's a fairly complex question, and Kyle, I trust that we answered that as best we possibly could at that point. Just again, relating to education and training, I guess, Nikki asked the question, I want to know if the SAPCMP contributes to compliance in the construction industry. Does anybody have an answer? Should we look that up rather? Park that question?
I think that's not really a question that can be answered because personally, I haven't had a lot of dealings with the SACP-CMP, but I did answer a question earlier regarding backlogs of registrations, because, you know, they say a safety officer has to be registered with them. And I remember doing an audit on a site, geez, it was a long time ago. And that safety officer had applied. She was had a diploma in safety management, was 100% qualified and competent to be a safety officer. And she had applied a year and a half before for her registration and still hadn't got it. So from that, I would say, no, they don't contribute. This was a while ago, so I don't want to be nasty. But I remember that. And I said to her while I was auditing, I said, you do know, legally speaking, you're not allowed to be on the site. I should make an adverse finding against you. Because, and I had to make the finding, but I qualified the finding because it was a non-compliance, but it wasn't a non-compliance for any fault of her own. And I think that's where the question I answered earlier, I can't remember, I think it was Derek, I can't remember the person's name, but I think even in the comments from SIOSH, they've even mentioned that these sort of qualifications, that what do you call it? Registration with professional bodies like SIOSH should be recognized as adequate, as opposed to having to be registered with the SACP-CMP. Because if you are regarded, if you join SIOSH and you want to become a technical member or a graduate member or a chartered member, there are certain things that you have to comply with. There are certain steps you have to go through. So when I became a graduate member, I had to submit copies of audits I'd done. I had to submit my qualifications, and they then do a review process and then say whether you are capable of doing that. So I think it wouldn't be a bad thing for that to be recognized as well. So yeah, I think I can't answer if they do add to compliance. I just give an example of my experience with a particular client of mine. I've never had dealings with them directly, so I don't want to be nasty, as I said, but
yeah,
just from what I've heard is that there are big backlogs, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah. So Wrench just answered actually in the chat here to say in a previous PCMP, they said no to a similar question, so they don't contribute towards compliance. So that's from them, I guess. Okay, we're actually over our time, by the way, and I see that there's still 40 odd people on there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one more question here. Any of the other questions we will try and respond to in due course. And it's a question from Christopher. It's a simple question with a lot of power behind it, and the question is, how do we better police compliance? And my hair stands up on my back of my neck a little bit when we say we've got to police compliance, because really compliance is not something that we should be policing. In fact, we shouldn't be policing at all. People should want to. It should be a cultural thing. But the way that you can help, from my view, and I'll ask the other panelists to elaborate on that, but for now, I think the way to highlight compliance is through reporting, through digital systems. Having digital systems giving you immediate line of sight, you will know at any point in time what your compliance status is, where you are, and where are you missing the mark. Therefore, you don't have to police. You can rather monitor by exception rather than having to, delve into all details and so on a continuous basis. So, Sean, I don't know if you want to comment on that as well.
Yeah, like you said, the policing is not the way to go, but obviously we need to understand how we want to head in which direction as a culture. Do we want to be just compliant, do it for the sake of compliance, or do we really believe that we can save people's life and prevent any incidents? And if we have a proper risk management system and we've got buy-in from everyone, we will comply and we won't have any incidents. So I think it's quite a big topic to discuss, but yeah, we definitely don't want to police people, but I know sometimes we have to for them to do the right thing. So it's quite a big culture thing, and it doesn't happen over time. So obviously there's initiatives that you can utilize to change people's culture and a company's culture, which you can also support with, but it takes time and it needs to have buy-in from all relevant parties from top to bottom.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sean. Dan, any further comments on that before we sign off?
Yeah, I think in terms of compliance, I agree with you. We should want to comply. Everyone wants to go home to their families, and compliance is a way to ensure that that happens. And so, we do have policing, DOL, or the mine health and safety guys. We do have them, and yes, the policing is not always that great, but I think it's also companies it should be one of the things that are at the forefront of their vision, is ensuring that they are compliant. In a sense, you're self-policing. And I said it earlier about all these things, and I think digitization is a way to help you in terms of compliance, to make it easier than making it daunting and too scary to look at. So I think we shouldn't want to police. We should want to be more compliant. And you can see, I think what I've seen, and I use that example in that company, but a company that is compliant is happier. Companies where there are a lot of accidents, a lot of incidents, there's uncertainty and it's not happy. And you want, I've always said, if you keep your employees happy, they'll keep your company happy, because they should be at the front, and compliance goes hand in hand with that as well.
Dan, thank you very much. Sean, thank you. Fielding some quite tough questions. Thank you to everybody that participated in this webinar. We really do appreciate it. We will make this available to all the people who participated, and we'll take snippets of it, and we'll also post it on social media going forward. You'll notice that in the chat, I posted my email address. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, formerly Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel, or you can go directly to our website, which is www.hseconline.com. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to contact us directly, please do feel free to do that. And with that, 22 minutes over time, we thank you very much for your patience. We thank you for your participation, and we wish you a very safe working environment, and all the very best in your endeavors to drive towards zero harm. Thanks, everybody. Cheers for now.